fairly open about my learning disability issues. I'm usually fairly open about the abuse and stuff such I've suffered in the past, with the caveat being that I'm aware it makes many people very uncomfortable, and I don't like to make people uncomfortable. So I try to gauge how much people can deal with without, you know, having big problems.
Well, just so you know, it takes a lot to make me uncomfortable.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Well, and I try to make it as ungloomy as I can out of, you know, generosity to the people who are listening to me. I try to keep it as antiseptic as possible, shall we say.
Okay, so we're broadcasting live. Hopefully this is being recorded somehow.
Hang on, I see the little live light in the top right corner. But yeah, I have lost friends talking about this kind of stuff.
Okay, that's one.
Is that picture on the wall behind you vanity? Sorry, total non sequitur, I realize. At this distance, it looks like a skull, but if you're up close to it, it's a woman looking at a reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with that artwork, yeah.
It's from that's an album cover from the day.
Oh, okay.
And there's a picture of me with the lead singer from the day.
Yeah, there's a researcher / speaker who talks about learning disabilities, who uses that artwork in one of his presentations in interesting ways. See, it's Richard Lavoie. He's awesome. If you ever want to, because there's a couple of videos of his on YouTube that are, if you want to understand learning disabilities better, that's who you'll listen to. You know, if you want to understand the nuts and bolts of how discrimination works, you want Jane Elliott. If you want to know about domestic violence, talk to Aaron Pitsey. So this is not moonshine. This is just water, in case you're wondering.
All right. Well, it is what it is. If this doesn't work, I'll call you back. We'll have another interview.
Okay.
Let's just assume that it's working and recording.
If not, if we need to do it again, I'm available to do it again. I don't know. My availability is nigh unto infinite. So, if you know, based on your availability, we can do it. You know, work it out, whatever. Like I said, if we can help one person, it's worth it for me. That's one person. If it was somewhere a button I could push and exchange my life so that there is never another person like me has to exist, I would totally do it. I would do it happily. But yeah, because I'm aware I'm not the only person like me. But yeah, but because really there's not.
You never hear about people like you.
Yeah, you never do. And unless we get pushed to the point where we see filtered,
right, to fit a certain whatever the dominant narrative. Right?
Yeah. People know about Anders Breivik because he decided that he'd had enough and he was going to fix the problem the only way he knew how. So now everyone knows about him, but no one gave a shit about him before he decided to pull out a gun and start shooting people. The world would have quietly sat back and let him languish in torment and agony for his entire life without lifting a finger to help him. Not to justify what he did. What he did was absolutely wrong. However, what society allowed to happen to him before was equally absolutely wrong. And you know, every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? That stuff doesn't fall out of the sky. Now I'm going to seem like I'm a crazy person, but anyway.
Well, I don't know a lot about Anders Breivik's history, his childhood, or anything.
Well, I know he was severely abused by his mother as a little kid. Yeah. In ways that I have a hard time listening to because it's very reminiscent of things that happened to me. Because Karen Strom did a video about him and about how you know, people who have been subjected to certain kinds of abuse for extensive periods of time are almost beyond help. And I have to believe that that isn't absolutely the case, but I can certainly see that it is not. Aren't any easy solutions.
So can you tell me a little bit about your childhood with and your experiences of abuse?
Yeah, absolutely. I was born 18 years after my older sister was born and 16 years after my older brother was born. There's definitely evidence that would indicate that it was an on purpose by my mother in order to keep my father chained to the marriage. I think because I know my brother. I my brother was 16. Like my sister moved out the year I was born, within a few months of when I was born. So I think that's where I came from. I was a weaponized offspring to keep my dad captured there. Badish. Sorry, my cat's wanting to contribute to the conversation. So that's where I started from. And I know that from when I was quite young, my parents were in separate bedrooms. Which I know as an adult, I wonder, was that to make sure that there weren't any more surprises in the future? So my earliest memories are of being sexually assaulted violently in the basement of the house where I grew up. The details are fuzzy. I was probably 3 or so. I didn't really understand at the time what was taking place. I knew that it was painful. I knew that it made me feel very bad about myself, but I didn't really understand what or why. But obviously, in retrospect, as an adult, you can put things in a bit more of a context. I remember not long after that, my mother being institutionalized for quite some time. I've been informed by people who were adults at the time that she voluntarily was subjected to extensive shock therapy. I've been told by people who were adults at the time, knew her before and after, that afterwards she was much worse in terms of her symptoms. However, I do know from personal experience that after the shock therapy and after being released, that she was obsessively cautious about doing things that would get her caught again, like she was caught that time.
How old were you when your mother was put away?
I ended up in a daycare center because it was before I was school aged. So but I remember it fairly well. So I would, based on that, I'm going to say 4, around the time I was 4 years old. It might have been a little younger, but not much. And it certainly wasn't any older because I started kindergarten based on when my birthday is. My birthday is in September. So I was like, if I'd been born a few days later, I would have started school the next year. So in my class, I was like pretty much as young as you could be. So I started kindergarten when I was still 4, technically, because my birthday is in early September. And they based it on, I believe, the school district I was in, and I could be misremembering, but I believe they based it on how old you were on the 15th of September, which is just a few days after my birthday.
So, what are some of the memories of abuse that you suffered when you were a school-age child?
Shh. Sorry, the cat's not being quiet. Oh, hold on. Sorry. I can either give him a treat or we can deal with him yowling in the background. I recall, as a young child, I was constantly being confronted by my mother with wild accusations against my father that contradicted each other on an ongoing basis. I mean, that's how I learned what homosexual meant. Is I was, I would be blamed for my father being homosexual, and that's why he didn't come. That's why he worked late. Is because he was having, and then graphically descripted sexual encounters would be then screamed at me, and then the following day it would be because he was doing graphically described sex acts with his secretary or with some other mysterious person, and it was something like there was a bit of a routine. They kept these themes kept recurring, but there was like a group of they would go through, like watching reruns of a TV show, right? You get the same episode again eventually. So I was being confronted with this.
Inconsistent stories.
Pardon me?
Inconsistent stories that didn't make sense.
Yes. Which, I mean, to that extent, as I got older, that flaw in it worked to my benefit, because when I became old enough to realize that all of these stories can't be true, it creates the possibility that none of these stories are true. But I was also very, too clever for my own good as a kid. When I was 5 years old, I deduced there was no Santa Claus because I was analyzing the handwriting on the gift tags. That the number of the gift tags were in exactly the same handwriting, including the ones from Santa Claus. So I wasn't sure exactly what it was, but I knew it was bogus because it was no way that all of these people have exactly the same handwriting. So I was sort of, I have sort of inclined to scientific type thoughts.
What about physical abuse?
I was beaten a lot. I've been poisoned, stabbed, burnt, acid splashed on me. I was my genitals were subjected to physical harm on a not uncommon basis. Choked unconscious, my head being held underwater for long periods of time. Well, at least it seems like a long period of time. It's probably like 20, 30 seconds maybe. But if you've ever had your head held underwater, you realize that it seems way longer. I had my pets killed. My things would be stolen. My things would be destroyed. When I would ignite,
just mind games, just mind games too.
A lot of petty cruelties. Like my abusive mother would stalk the house at night. So I learned to leave the lights on. Like I would wake up sometimes at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and she'd just be standing over me, glaring down at me.
Creepy.
So I would learn to leave the light on, and I had like a little light beside my bed, which was like the other side of the bed from where the door was. So if she came in to try and turn off the light, the floor was creaky, and usually the creaky floor would wake me up. But if it didn't, if she missed the creaky spot, when the light would go off, I would wake up. So that little looming thing wore, and I mean, to this day, I sleep with the light on. Also, it helps having the light on decreases being talking shop again. Having the light on decreases the amount of melatonin that's released, which means you don't sleep as deeply, which also means that if you have a bad dream, you wake up more easily, which I found out years later that why these things I were doing actually are beneficial in terms of brain anatomy and brain chemistry when I was taking that psychology classes. So I ended up becoming a master of sleep deprivation, where I was sleeping, for most of my developmental years, I was sleeping at best 4 hours a night, because it generally wasn't safe to sleep.
What about your experience at school? What teachers?
At school, I mean, I was I made myself, not necessarily consciously, I made myself an outcast. Because again, with the learning disabilities I have, social interactions are more difficult for me, given that I had no sort of normal socialized background. That made it difficult for me. The fact that I was um, very, very smart and knew a lot of things one way or another that people my age didn't know. It was difficult for me. So I mean, I had pretty much the deck was stacked against me in terms of having any sort of positive social interaction. And then if I tried having social interactions and they invariably went badly, then that got added on to all of the grief and the anguish that was being generated by the abuse. So it was really, it's like I could, I was essentially opting out of social life because I didn't have any of the necessary social currency to put forth. I didn't have the skill to play the social interaction game, and school time was damage control. It was putting back the pieces of my psyche together. It was bracing myself for the next round of psychological, physical, emotional, sociological torture that I was staring down the barrel of when my mother got home from work that night. So yeah, socialization was so far off the radar in terms of what I had to do to survive that it was never an issue. I would sometimes have one or two friends. Generally, the second biggest outcast in the class would sometimes end up, out of a process of elimination, being friends with me. Or sometimes, if there was other gifted kids in the class, they would end up tolerating my weirdness because at least I could have an intelligent conversation with them. And that sort of became my social niche, such that it was. And again, that was before the days of the internet. So having somebody around who can remember all kinds of ridiculous information was more useful then than it is now, because now you can pull out your cell phone and what movie won Best Picture in 1972, and you can look it up. You don't need somebody there who remembers all that kind of crap. So I had a bit more. I had some utilitarian purposes. So I was sometimes permitted to associate with people by virtue of the fact I had some utilitarian functionality to me.
What about your relationship with your father? What role did your father play in your life?
Yeah, I was very close with my father. We were in the same boat, largely. In later years, he went on to tell me that sort of I was what kept him going, and in a very real way, he was what kept me going. We were. I mean, I've seen films where it's like, two guys in the same trench, and the sort of deep rapport, and like the old war movies, the deep rapport and the connection these two people have because they mutually need each other to survive in this hostile environment, and there was a certain element of that to it as well. And we had each other's backs, when if things got really bad. I remember one point when I was early teens, my mother had poisoned my dad's drink, and he was in danger of dying. And so he was very weak, and he was in bed, and he couldn't barely move because he was so sick from, which he didn't know what it was at the time. It turned out later to be poison. So I slept in his bedroom on the floor, lying in front of the door, so the door couldn't be opened. So my mother could not get in and finish him off while he was in a weakened state. And I was sleeping on the floor with a small hatchet under my pillow. So if she were to come in with a butcher knife, because she had attacked me with butcher knife in the past, I would at least have a chance of defending myself. which again, I realize that my experiences are so far beyond the pale of what the vast majority of people deal with that it sounds. I know I'm aware it sounds unbelievable, and I apologize, but it was what it was, and that was my life, and that's why when I meet people in the street, they sometimes have a hard time dealing with me because I come from a background that's so different from what is considered normal and what people expect. In particular, given that I can I generally have some amount of eloquence in how I present my information, and I speak fairly nice English for the most part. I think that confounds people's perceptions of me, and it makes it seem weirder. I think if I was, I don't know, if I
Makes
was
them doubt their
Maori with
reality.
facial scars, pardon me.
Makes them doubt their reality and
Yeah, well, definite
violate their
cognitive dissonance. Yeah, they can't reconcile someone who looks well. It's different with the hair and the beard, but when I had short hair and I was wearing like a shirt and tie to work and I was working in an office, they really couldn't reconcile someone who looks normal and seems normal having this background that is so abnormal. And I mean, I've had therapists who have remarked that my level of functionality, given my background, is nothing short of miraculous. That there's really, statistically speaking, there's no way I should be able to function in society at all, given the socially depraved nature of the background I was in. But I mean, I had books. It's probably where it comes from. I'm sorry, I have a sore throat. I read voraciously. I'm sure that helped. I mean, and when I talk about things, I frequently reference fictional characters and movies and books and things like that, because that's a lot of the gaps in my development. I sort of jury rigged sections from fictional narratives to try and plug holes. You know, it's. I mean, sociological, sociological point of view, I'm something like Frankenstein's monster. I'm these bits and pieces of different from different places that have been fused together to make something that's marginally functional, but is certainly not in any way elegant or appealing. If that, I don't know if that. I have a metaphor thing. I know it sounds like I'm speaking English, but my native language is metaphor. So I do sometimes get really deeply into metaphors. Sometimes I try to rein it in a bit, but yeah. But when when I hit a snag, that's where I'll end up. And so if you need me to rephrase things, I can. But yeah.
So while the abuse was going on, were there any signs? Did you ever try to get help?
Yes. When I was, due to an unfortunate series of events, when I was 5 years old, I did attempt suicide while at school, because based on the information I had to work with, being dead was preferable to going back home and being subjected to more abuse. And apparently, a 5-year-old making a serious suicide attempt at school did raise a few red flags. And I do have a scar on my forehead from that attempt, which was now 40 years in the past. And there's a notch in my skull that feels a little bit like the sort of like a notch in the payphone where you put the coins in. But all that really led to is me being asked a lot of questions by professionals, medical or otherwise, which led to me telling them why I tried to kill myself. Because at the time I didn't really know that what was happening in my home was different than what was happening in other kids' homes because I wasn't allowed to interact with their kids. And I said, like, I didn't really interact at school. And if I tried to, it usually went badly because I didn't really have much in common with these people. But yeah, so this suicide attempt did involve me getting asked some fancy questions. And when I told the truthful answers to these questions, that led to a meeting being set up one evening with, I would guess, I don't know, I was like 5 years old. It was some important looking men in suits sitting behind a big desk. As an adult, I'm going to guess it was probably a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Given the era, probably a psychiatrist. And they brought me in and they sat me down in front of the big desk, and they sat my mother in the chair beside me. And I mean, when I'd been questioned about, when the questions I'd been asked leading up to this were all me explaining the types of abuse my mother was subjecting me to on a regular basis. And at the time, I didn't really know that this was unusual. I didn't know that they would expect anything other than this being the answer. So I've been telling them. So they sit me down across from this guy in the big guy in the important looking fellow behind the big desk, with my feet dangling off the edge of the chair because my legs don't reach the floor yet because I'm a little kid. And the guy behind the door the guy behind the desk said something along the lines of, Edward, do you think that, no, would you like to tell us why it is you may have tried to hurt yourself at school? And I remember the wording "may have tried to hurt yourself" because in my brain I'm like, was this a joke? Right? I tried to shove a house key through my skull. I wasn't, I didn't might try to hurt myself. I was trying to kill myself, and I was pretty clear on that. I knew what I was doing at the time. I wasn't just, I wonder what'll happen if I do this. It's like, no. I'm going to engage in this activity with the sole purposes of ending my existence. That's what I was intending to do. So I wasn't thinking I might try and hurt myself. And I knew that this guy I've been told anyway, that this guy was getting the information that I had given the people who asked me questions before. So I'm sitting in front of this important looking guy next to the person who I wanted to kill myself to get away from, being asked, why am I trying to kill myself? And I remember very distinctly, and again, I'm a little guy. I'm a big guy now, so it's hard to imagine. But I remember looking over at my mother, who I believe is 5'3", if I'm remembering correctly, and she was looming over me. And I remember leaning back to look up high enough to see her face. And she smiled down at me, oh so sweetly, and said, "Go ahead, Edward, tell them." And I knew that any attempt to do so would be more than my life was worth. And so I didn't say anything. And then that all got, then they didn't. Okay, then because I wouldn't talk, they sent me home with the person I tried to kill myself to get away from. And then, then there's a ragged hole in my memory for about a week or two following that. And apparently I missed a lot of school in the week or two following that. And I haven't poked too deeply into that hole in my memory to find out what's there. I've done that with other holes in my memory, and I found out that the things in those holes are better left alone. So that was my experience with asking for help. Yes. It resulted in extended torture sessions and the kind mercy of my egg donor, as I tend to refer to her.
Was it the last time you asked for help?
I think it was the last time I ever went to a professionally type person, because that was the thing when you're a kid. They're like, oh, if you tell a grown up if bad things are happening to you, tell a grown up and they'll get you help. And and didn't work. I mean, I was never. I mean, I knew which types of the abuse, if I talked about, would result in events leading to another hole in my memory. But I mean, it was never a secret that I was being abused by my mother. I mean, my older brother had gone to that same school and had some of the same teachers, and he had passed out at school because he had had nothing to eat for a few days. And I mean, that was on record. They knew that, you know, the same mother he had was the same mother I had. So I mean, it was not a big secret. It just, I don't know. I don't know if it's just that nobody cared, or if it was nobody's business, or and I mean, and it was. I mean, yeah. And this is the talking about like the early mid '70s. So it was a different kind of thing. I mean, that's even before the domestic violence becoming a talk aboutable thing, which is horrible grammar. I apologize. Was after that. So I mean, that was even at that point, you know, women with black eyes and sunglasses, or men with black eyes and sunglasses, for that matter, when walking down the street, you didn't know the people didn't comment on it. It just, you know, it just wasn't polite to comment on things like that. And I think part of that social attitude extended to, or in part, that sort of social leaning extended to kids being abused. It, you know, it happened, but you know, if the kid doesn't have, you know, broken arms, you know, well, or missing body parts, you might notice that. But if the parent in question, you know, has been electroshocked into knowing to hide the abuse, because I remember like a lot of the damage that would be done to me would be done like under my shirt or under my shorts, where a lot of it was, and I was imprinted very heavily. By that I mean like behaviorism stuff, like when they electrically shock rats to make them do or don't do certain things. I was heavily imprinted upon to never, ever, 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 ever take my shirt off around other people. ever, 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 ever take my shirt off around other people. And I remember like one Christmas, my sister had gotten me a scratch and sniff T-shirt with an orange on it. And I would have been like, I was 7, 8, something like that. I don't know. A lot of my life seems to happen when I'm 7 or 8. So I'm sure some of it was a little earlier or a little later, but I don't know why that year seems to stick out. And so she got me that for Christmas. And so I wanted to try it on. So I went into my bedroom to change, to put this scratch and sniff orange, because I don't really have those anymore, but to put this shirt on. And I remember her mocking me and making fun of me and belittling me about going into my room to change my shirt. Which I found, I mean, I'm not to blame her for it. She just has sort of she has a acerbic wit. She has kind of a prickly sense of humor. That's just, yeah, it was a bit insensitive, but you know, big sisters giving little brothers a hard time is not exactly, you know, unheard of in history.
So about when did the abuse stop for you?
The abuse, the direct daily abuse got whittled down significantly when my parents moved from Southern Ontario to Northern Ontario. My father was staying in a hotel room in Northern Ontario, in the city where he was working, and then when summer vacation started, he took me up there with him. So I was away from my mother's sphere of influence for quite some time.
And that was how old were you?
That would have been for grade 8. So let me see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So lost count. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
13,
right.
maybe?
12 or 13. Yeah, 12 or 13. So that was my first significant respite. I mean, like as a little kid, I would hide myself away in the basement as much as possible, and I would like rearrange the cardboard boxes that were down there so that there was like crawl spaces between them and empty space between them and the wall, so I could crawl in there and hide and not be easily gettable. But other than things like that, it was my first significant break from her, and it allowed me a certain amount of. I mean, I had enough time to do some serious repair work on my psyche, as opposed to just sort of patch welding patches on that hopefully will last another day. Metaphor, sorry. And yeah, so I was there. I'm guessing it's within maybe a year or so that she finally moved up north as well. Because my father ended up buying a house there, and then she moved into the house in Elliott Lake. And I mean, but I mean, the time away from her, and the fact that I was now physically, at least on par, to a degree anyway. I wasn't vastly smaller anymore. Changed the dynamics a bit. The fact that I'd been away from her for a while changed the dynamics a bit. And I think the going into when you start getting into your teenage years, your attitude can change a bit too. So all of those sort of things were conspiring together. Yeah. So I remember at one point I'd had like a really crappy day at school, and I came home and I'd wanted to do something. And she started in on me as soon as I got in the door. And teenage rebelliousness can have awesome moments sometimes. And I said, "Fuck you," to her, and she didn't. She had no idea what to do. Because I mean, physically, she didn't overwhelm me anymore. She was stumped. It was hilarious. I guess would count as a Pyrrhic victory of a sort. Just to look at her face, because she that point she couldn't use any of the old tricks, any of the old nastiness. Wasn't going to work because I had stopped caring at a certain point. The fear was starting to dissipate, and without the fear, she had no power over me. So she sent me to my room and said, "Wait until your father gets home," which was hilarious because he was my support. It's like, yeah. So he gets home because he was getting home earlier then because he didn't work as far away. And I remember overhearing her tell him when he walked in the door, "You're not going to believe what your son said to me. Your son called me a fuck." And the grammatic error of that just was hilarious. It's gallows humor perhaps, but you take what you can get. So he came into my room, and like we were very, very close. We'd been each other's support for years and years and years. And he just looked at me. And he had this look in his face. And the look was, "I know why you did it. You know, I know why you did it. But dude, now I have to deal with it." It was none of this was verb. This was all just the look. "Ed, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm sorry. I was like, So that was like, yeah, it was like maybe 2 or 3 words between, like the whole conversation, facial expressions, and it's like, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Yes, I should know better because yes, he has to pay the tab for that, and I felt bad about that. But I got also an air from him that he was a little bit proud of me because like he knew, like because he was. Well, I'm sure there was some elements of the abuse he wasn't necessarily completely aware of, if for virtue of the fact that it would be like what he knew about was hard enough for him to deal with as it was, because he was powerless to stop it.
You told me a story earlier about the time when you locked yourself in the bathroom. Can you tell?
Yes. When that was my first drawing a line in the sand kind of a moment. because years go by, I was starting to notice the inconsistencies in the stories, that like my father can't be totally gay and only wanting to have sex with men and having sex with every woman in the city of Toronto at some point or another. It was like ridiculous. There was no internal logic here. So I was starting to see that there was holes in it. And one of the routines, as I mentioned, she went through different routines. Like one day, oh, your dad's gay and that's why he's never around. Your dad's sleeping with the secretary, that's why he's never around. At one point, I was responsible for the start of the Second World War. Never quite explained how that was the case. But when you're a little kid and your parent is telling you these things, you don't necessarily know to question them or even how to question them if you wanted to question them, because you're totally reliant on what grown-ups tell you when you're a little kid. That's all you know of the world. And one of the steps in the cycle, and in some ways the most unpleasant step in the cycle, and perhaps the step in the cycle that facilitated the worst of the damage, was when she would play nice. And it was creepy. And she would be, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. And I've heard the term love bombing from Dr. Tara Palmatier on her show. And I think this is pretty close to what that would, I think this would be a version of that, sort of a parental love bombing thing. And it was apologies and it was promises to not do it ever again. And
certainly a term that you don't want to abuse, right? Love bombing.
Yeah. It's,
are you love bombing me? What's this all about?
Yeah. It's just, well, and after, the first time someone does something horrible to you and they apologize, and you go, okay, maybe it was just a mistake, and then they do the horrible thing again, and then they apologize, and then they do the horrible thing, and then they apologize. Each apology is going to be less meaningful than the one before. And after years of this cycle, these apologies are worse than meaningless. It's just a marker that the cycle is about to restart. And I think ultimately the apology portion of the cycle is to dig the claws in deeper so that you can tear and do more damage. Because like the psychological, the reason why your parent or a sibling or a family member hits you with a stick and breaks your arm, why that is more traumatic than you're playing with your friends and you fall down and you break your arm, is because of the emotional connection you have with the person who's doing it and the fact that it's something that you trust that they're not going to do. That's why it messes you up. That's the worst part of the abuse. Not that the physical stuff isn't bad, but physical damage will heal on its own for the most part. It's the psychological damage that the physical damage facilitates that makes your life horrible and does the damage that takes decades to recover from, sometimes can never be recovered from. So the love bomb portion is to get close enough to sink the claws in really deep to start the ripping apart again. So it was one of these love bomb sessions. Thanks, Dr. T. And I was at that point, I think I was 8. I knew the deal. There was no purchase being gained using this tactic anymore. I was done with falling for this crap. And one of the defenses that would always come up during these sessions was that she didn't remember these horrible things that she did. Now, she remembered what they were enough to say she didn't remember them, which I was smart enough at that point to realize is a bit of a contradiction. You can't say to somebody, I have no memory of stealing your car and running over your dog and then running your car into a ditch and then blowing up your car. I don't remember that at all. I don't remember coming home and, setting the house. If you didn't remember, you wouldn't know what it was you didn't remember, right? Is the point I'm making. Not that I had a car that she stole, but just as an example. So I was on the ball enough to realize that if she really didn't remember, she wouldn't remember what it was she didn't remember. And it was this whole litany of, oh, I would never do this, I would never do that. I don't remember doing this, I don't remember doing that. Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. I love you, I love you, I love you. You're my special little boy. I would never hurt you. Blah 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 blah. And it was turning my stomach nauseous dealing with it. And I said, well, even if you did, you wouldn't remember anyway, would you?
Even if you did what?
Even if she did, like I would never hurt you. I would never, I would never cut you. I would never. And I was like, and even if you did, I said, you won't remember anyway, right? Because I was like, here's my proclamation of, I'm not buying your routine. Is essentially what it was. I was like, yeah, nice try.
You challenged her reality.
Yes. Yeah. I said no. I said no. Essentially, is what it was. I said no. I'm not believing this story. I'm having none of this. You're full of shit. Is essentially what I said by saying you just won't remember. That's what it was. And she stopped on a dime, like that, and the love bomb was over, and her face went pure white, and she flew out of my bedroom. And my brain is scrambling. And so I flew out of the bedroom almost immediately. Before she was out the door, I was running for the door too. And I ran down the hall, and she ran to the end of the hall. And as I'm turning into the bedroom, or into the bathroom, I'm sorry. I ran to the bathroom. As I'm turning into the bathroom, I see her coming out. Oh, I get my finger in the screen here so it makes sense. I see her coming out of the kitchen with a big-ass butcher knife in her hand. So I quickly slam and lock the bathroom door. And in the bathroom we had then, just so you can picture it a bit, there was like a false wall at like the foot of the bathtub. And then between that wall and the back wall, there was like a three-sided. My hands are not in screen. I'm sorry. There was like a three-sided area where the toilet was in it, about the size of a phone booth. I'm guessing this little alcove kind of a thing. So I lock the bathroom door. I run to the end of the bathroom and I crawl behind the toilet into this little alcove area.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm sort of peeking around the edge of the fake wall, and I'm watching the door to see if the door is going to hold up. And she must have been pounding on the outside of the door with the butt of the butcher knife, like in the base of her hand. Like if the knife is like this pen, so she's banging on the door with the handle, the bottom of the handle of the butcher knife, and pound, pound, pound on this door. And there's a mirror on the back of the door, and I'm watching the mirror rattling. And it was almost like distorting, almost creating like ripples in the mirror. Hammering, hammering, hammering on the door, demanding that I open the door, demanding that I let her in, demanding that I come out, demanding. And no, I'm not doing it. And it must have been a weekend, because my father was home at the time. He was in the living room. And so after what seemed like 1,000 years of watching this mirror shake, and I kept thinking the mirror's going to break, or the door is going to come bursting off the hinges, or something. Something's going to give. I hear his voice, because he would do a thing with his voice when he was being stern. And he did the stern voice thing, and then he came, and I heard him approaching, and I heard a conversation outside the bathroom door, and a little bit of a struggle. I'm guessing he took the knife away from her, and then he took her into the living room. And it was really quiet for, again, what seemed like 1,000 years. And then he came back to the door, and he's talking to me quietly through the door. And he's trying to calm me down, and he's telling me it's safe. That she's out of the pit. She's out of the way right now. I can come out. And I remember crawling out from under the toilet and crawling very terrifiedly to that door, and not knowing if she was there For all I knew, she could have the knife to his throat and be making him say this. I didn't know. I opened the door anyway. And I remember I was incapable of speech at the time. I was in shock. And I mean, and that moment in my life has always stood out with clarity. It's and I mean, and I've said it in metaphor, but in many ways it is true that the 8-year-old boy that ran into the bathroom and hid behind the toilet never came back out again. There's a part of me, and again, you know, not literally, obviously, but significantly, there's a part of me that remains trapped in that bathroom, hiding under that toilet, afraid to come out. And I mean, and I don't know if that is going to make sense to anybody who hasn't been in a horribly traumatic situation like that. But I mean, sometimes I like it's well, figuratively speaking,
like maybe a PTSD.
Pardon me? Well, yeah, I do. I do have. Yeah, I have complex PTSD. Yeah, among other things, and depression, and dysthymia, which is a constant low-grade depression, and I have deep depressions. I have. Well, I said I was suicidal when I was 5. I've been struggling with suicidal ideation my whole entire life. When my most recent romantic-ish relationship was going badly, I had to not walk. I couldn't. It was not safe for me to walk down busy streets because every vehicle that came by, I would have to almost wrestle with myself to keep myself from jumping in front of it. So I learned, okay, walk down the back streets because there's way less traffic. Because when it's constantly, you know, vroom, 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 cars, it's like constantly jump, 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 and I didn't want to.
So do you think that perhaps you could have benefited, or your father could have benefited from an abuse shelter?
Oh, hell yes.
Where he could have taken you?
Yeah.
To take shelter from your mom?
Yeah, I mean, the reason he didn't leave is because he knew he couldn't take me with him, and I would be left alone with her. And so he subjected himself to arguably he could, like, if my brother went away to school when he was 18, so I was about 2 or 3 then. So I mean, arguably he'd spent over a decade living with this insane, violent, venomous reptile of a human being, because he was doing his best to protect me. And some people who I've told told about this part of my life to actually take a dim view on his part, like, oh well, he could have done more, he could have done this, could have. I was there. First of all, he did more than any human being asked to do. He did the best he could, given that the law was stacked against him. He did the best he could, given that he was being subjected to as much, if not more, abuse, granted of a different type, than I was myself. Like, I know when my siblings were kids, the trick, and I'm using the word out of its normal context, dirty trick, nasty, one of the really nasty, vindictive, hateful, soul-destroying things, to give it a better description, that my mother would do to him when he was much younger and he had the 2 kids at home. He would be on his way out the door to work, and she would expect me and the kids to be here when you get home. And I mean, being a father, I know how fucking horrible that notion is. And he was bombarded with that on a regular basis. I mean, my parents were married for 30-some, maybe close to 40 years. And he was dealing with her that whole time. And I remember one of the things I remember, because it was around the time the law changed, which is why we were finally, me and my father and I were able to actually move out. He was meeting with the lawyer, and he was asking the lawyer, like, okay, when can we move out? When's the law going to go into effect? When can I get the paperwork done to do this, that, and the other? And the lawyer, who seemed like a really nice guy, I know the stereotype is that that's not the case. And granted, my watermark for what a crappy person is like is really extreme, so that might be calculating into it too. But he's like looking over at me, and he seems concerned about me and my well-being, talking about it, because this would have been when I was maybe 10 or 11 or 12, somewhere in that neck of the woods. And my dad's talking to this lawyer about divorcing my mom and what the logistics of it are going to be. And at one point, the lawyer, who's looking very worried, and he seems to be he seemed to be emotionally distant from the situation to a certain degree, if that makes sense. And at one point he turned to me and he said, "Oh, don't worry. You'll still be able to see your mom when your parents get divorced." And I turned to him, and like that, right? Because I mean, he's thinking I have a normal mom, presumably. And I turned to him with must have been a look of like disgust and revulsion on my face. And I said, "Why would I want to?" And it was like a light bulb went on over his head. And he wasn't emotionally distant from this case anymore. It was personal for him at that point. I saw that light bulb over his head, and I didn't realize, these are things you notice in retrospect, right? But I noticed his attitude dramatically change when that was my instant response. He's like, "Oh, this situation is the fucked up." And I remember, my mother would show up out of the blue in people's lives, like a curse from Satan. And when we moved to Elliott Lake, when I moved up north, Elliott Lake's where I went. My dad was working at the hospital there for quite some time, and my mother was still in Southern Ontario. And he would obviously, you mention, "Oh, I'm married. Oh, blah blah blah." And so I guess he talked about the situation a little bit, because you do. People work together; they talk about stuff other than work, because your brain goes crazy if you don't. And I wasn't privy to these conversations. This is him at work with coworkers. And then my mom moves up to Northern Ontario as well. And so it was a different situation than Southern Ontario, where they'd been living together as a couple in the same house for decades, and all the most of the neighbors had been there a lot of that time period as well. So it was a known. The equation was known. It wasn't a lot of mystery. So she comes up there. They're used to my dad. They're not used to her. And so she starts showing up and starting her normal bullcrap. And several times I happen to have been present when people, after having been exposed to her, would then go to my dad and say, "When you told me all that stuff about your wife, I thought you were exaggerating, but you weren't. She's worse than that." And he went, "Well, yeah, I know." But I was privy to that conversation 5 or 6 times from different people who they just don't believe it. They can't. It's cognitive dissonance. People don't do that. People don't poison their own children. People don't mothers don't sexually abuse little boys. That's the crazy talk. No one's going to believe that. Actually, one of the comments I put recently on YouTube, Dean Esme had posted something about people not believing stories, and about and men getting men's issues getting relegated to the back of the bus. And I put a little blurb about when I attempted to talk about my childhood issues, people will say things, "Oh, well, that could never happen to a boy." And then I said, and usually my seat on the bus ends up being under it. And I've gotten 50 some thumbs up on that. So apparently I'm not the only one who has experienced that phenomenon. that people just, they don't want to believe it. No, a mother could never do that to her child. No, that just can't happen. And whether that's socially ingrained, or whether that's surely biological thing, or whether that's just because humans do tend to project onto other people their own experiences. So if someone has a loving mother, they sort of seem to go through life assuming that mother equates to loving individual. And for myself, and an unfortunately large and an unfortunately forgotten percentage of humanity, mother does not equal loving. Mother does not equal protection. Mother does not equal safety. Mother does not equal kindness. Which is why I mentioned before we were recording that I tend not to use the word mother to describe my female parent. I tend to use the term egg donor. And I think even that is giving her more credit than she deserves.
Has this?
I remember.
Do you think your experience with your mother had an effect on your relationships, intimate relationships?
Yes. All of my romantic relationships, to call them something, have been various shades of dysfunctional. Now there has been, to be fair to myself, there has been a trend where they've gotten better, or lad, I don't know, which sort of means the same thing. But yeah, when I was married, the old adage that you marry someone like your mother. Now, granted, it was someone of the same category, but it's I mean, in terms of efficiency of destructiveness, the ex-wife might be a bad thunderstorm, where my mother, it'd be as a category 5 tornado. Not that it's not capable of doing as much damage in certain areas, but certainly the ability to do damage overall is not as massive. But yeah, there was a I'll say it. I'll say it the way it was. It's something that I know I'm going to say it, and if anyone listens, they're going to be doing, oh, that can't be right. On my birthday, yeah, here we go. My now ex-wife seems to have been planning to do away with me. There's a lot of evidence that was the case. And I was tipped off by someone who I choose to leave anonymous, as that person has passed away since. And that person was doing me a huge favor, and I don't want any bad memories to be after the fact laid on the memory of this individual who warned me that I was in danger. So I made plans where I knew what we were supposed to be doing and where we were supposed to be going that day, and I had arranged with a friend that, okay, between this time and that time, I'm supposed to be at this place, and I will phone you from this place. And if you do not hear from me during that time period, you contact the police, you give them the description of the vehicle, you give them the license plate number. Because I had very strong reason to suspect my life was in danger. So I get in the car with my, at that time, wife, and it's like, oh no, we're not going to the place I said we were going. We're going to this other remote, secluded location where I have lots of guns and where it would be very easy to hide a body. That's not how she worded it ultimately, but the place she said we were going, it does meet that description perfectly. And I said, no, I'm not going there. And the incredulity. And I said, look, here's the situation. You said we were going to these places. And against what I just said, right? I said we were going to these places, and I've arranged with people that I'm going to contact them when I reach these places. And if I don't contact them, they're contacting the police and they're giving them your name, description of this vehicle, and the license plate number if they do not hear from you. So that facilitated a change in plans. So again, I can't explicitly prove in a court of law that yes, she was conspiring to do me in. However, there's a whole lot of circumstantial evidence, and her anger at me not going along with the plan of taking me to the secluded location with guns and places to hide bodies did not in any way dissuade me from believing that was her original plan, shall we say. So what ended up happening is went to a family member's place.
Well, she could be angry if she had just realized that you didn't really trust her and you thought she thought
that could have been it. Yeah, I mean, the person who called me and tipped me off would have most probably been involved in some of the planning as in regards to how to get rid of the body. And I'm like, I honestly believe they tipped me off to protect my ex-wife. They did not want my ex-wife to go through with this because it would mean that my daughter's father is now dead and mother is now in jail. So that's ultimately why I think this person chose to let me know what they let me know in the manner they chose to let me know. So what eventually happened is there was a couple other dirty tricks that were set up that I didn't fall for. Because given my, pardon me?
How did the two of you get along during your relationship? Why did you separate?
Well, it was
Did you have?
It was just the one. Between when we met and when I was essentially left on the side of the road to die, was 2 years. So it was all in, out, quickly. Again, lots of the Dr. Tara's love bombing stuff was going on. Between when I met her and when we got married was around 6 months. And for the first 6 months, everything seemed fine. And I mean, we had a lot of mutual friends, which seemed to speed up the process quite a bit. As I don't know, I suppose that probably isn't uncommon, where you meet somebody. If you meet somebody you don't know anyone who they know, there's going to be more of a, observing each other. But yeah, she knew lots and lots of people who knew lots and lots of people that I knew. So and these people thought, oh, what a wonderful couple these two would make. And so a lot of things were being done to facilitate us having time together and facilitate us, this growing relationship was being aided and abetted by these mutual friends who thought they were doing both of us a favor. And many of whom came to me afterwards and tearfully apologized. And were convinced that I must hate them now for having been involved in it. And I didn't. But yeah, a lot of them had a really, really hard time with the aftermath. So I mean, that sort of sped things along. I was also in the process of trying to get legal to work in the States. So that became a reason to get married sooner rather than later as well. But like I said, things were seeming hunky-dory for the first 6 months. We got married there's a couple different ceremonies, because one was a civil ceremony and one was like we rented like a hall kind of thing to invite all the friends to show up and that sort of stuff. So actually it was actually officially our anniversary was going to be February 2nd, which is Groundhog's Day. We technically were married January 31st by Justice of the Peace at the courthouse, but the ceremony part was on Groundhog's Day. And I should interject that the reason it was Groundhog's Day is because as a kid growing up, the absolute worst days of the year were holidays and birthdays. And the worst holiday of the year was Christmas. These were just the nightmare was most manifest on these events. So I grew up hating holidays in general, Christmas in particular, and my birthday almost above anything else. So as I got older and I was looking for something, looking for positive things, because when you're depressed, you need to do that. You need to find positive things you can hang on to when the depression starts to suck you down. That you can that it can have some mass to them, so they can sustain you for a little bit.
Some hope.
Yeah, something to hang some hope on. That so I had picked Groundhog Day as being my holiday because nothing horrible had ever happened to me on Groundhog Day, and by virtue of that fact, it was my favorite holiday of the year. So we ended up married, and it's around that time of year. So we decide that would be a good day to get married on. So much for my one good day of the year.
Was it a good day though?
The actual wedding itself. The wedding was nice. I mean, I did some historical research. I wrote the whole ceremony. I wrote both of our vows. Red flag and where? What flag? So I wrote all the vows. I looked up like a lot of traditional Celtic marriage ceremonies and some other Western European archaic type marriage ceremonies, and I sort of combined different things together to write the vows and the ceremony and everything like that. So yeah, at the time things seemed fine. So we're married on February 2nd. Now, February 14th, 12 days later, my now wife made me a Valentine's Day card in jail. That's how quickly things turned bad after we got married. Because turns out, no one bothered to tell me, she is has a long history of fraud, notorious for writing bad checks for things. And what had happened is they had stopped her on the way home from work for a busted tail light. They'd run her name, and there is a warrant for her out of St. Joseph's, Missouri, which is where Jesse James was shot, coincidentally. So she gets taken into custody and transported to Missouri. And St. Joseph's, Missouri is on from where I was located in Ohio, was like the other side of Missouri. It's like right on the border with Kansas. Sort of how like Ottawa is sort of on the border with Quebec. It's almost like that because it's like right on the border with Kansas. Because at one point we were there and we went left rather than right, and we were in Kansas. So we turned around and went back. And so I got to
the line everybody
wants to do. Yeah, she was in jail within a few days of us getting married. Well, I ended up getting friends of mine to drive me out to, was it 8-9 hour drive, I'm thinking, from Dayton, Ohio to St. Joseph, Missouri. It was a haul. So I had some of my friends drive out there with me to bail her out because no one in her family was willing to bail her out anymore because they'd had it with her. They would let her rot in jail forever. They would not lift a finger to help. So I had to get my friends to drive out there to bail her out. And that like triggered the entire house of cards that had fabricated falling apart. That's when I found out that she's a known heroin user. That's when I found out she has several felony convictions. That's when I found out that her nickname in college was the Black Widow. No, red flag? Where? What red flag? Yeah. So yeah, things started falling apart pretty rapidly.
And she was pregnant at that time?
Yeah, she was pregnant very shortly. Well, yes, she was pregnant at that point. Yeah. Yeah, she was pregnant. When my daughter was born 6 months before the end of our relationship. So yeah. So we were together.
Other than her being in jail, what else was dysfunctional about the relationship?
Yeah, well, that's when I started finding out all of the skeletons in her closet.
So you basically didn't trust her at that point.
Well, I mean, I didn't know, right? You wake up in the morning and your wife's not there. It's like, oh, how come she's not home from work yet? Because she was working at night, and she'd come home like in the early hours in the morning, and sometimes I'll wake up and sometimes, but wake up and she's not there. Like, what the hell's going on? Yeah, so that's when I started finding out about all of the stuff in her past, and then the drug use and everything else, and then it's like, oh, but that's all in the past. That doesn't happen anymore. That would never happen. Anyone who's ever known anyone with that kind of a past, that's the story they give you. It never happened. Oh, that's just I was young. I made some bad choices, but I've moved on from that. The whole rigmarole, right? Movie of the week speech. And then the relationship started to get worse. I mean, it was there was a lot of echoes from the kind of crap that I dealt with as a kid. Everything was my fault. Everything was because of me. I was always because I wasn't, because I was still getting legal to work in the States. So I couldn't legally work. I was doing occasional off the book, under the table kind of jobs here and there as best I could. But knowing that, if I get caught for any of this, then my application to work legally gets flushed down the toilet. So I'm being pretty careful about what stuff I'm doing. And then my daughter, gets born. And I was the stay-at-home father because my wife at that point had never held a baby, had never been around kids, didn't know how to change a diaper, didn't know how to burp a baby, didn't know how to feed a baby, nothing like that. As I mentioned, I had older siblings. I was babysitting my sister's kids from the time I was like 11 or 12 years old. I was the go-to babysitter. And I spent one summer vacation staying at my sister's house because between when her husband was at work and when she was at work, there was a couple hour, like 2-3 hour blocks when neither of them were home. So I was there, so she didn't have to take time off work to look after the baby. She could still work full time, and then I would sort of babysit for those couple of hours in the afternoon when both of them happened to be at work. So I had a lot of experience looking after babies. So I'm looking after my daughter. And then shortly after my daughter turned 6 months old, there was what I have strong reason to believe was a plot to do me in, because we were in the middle of moving from Ohio to Texas. So it's not like my absence would necessarily be missed by anybody, because the people in Ohio would be expecting me to be gone away in Texas, and the people in Texas could be told that I had not come or whatever. It would have been easy to sweep under the rug. And ended up with her making a false DV claim, false 911 call that domestic violence was happening, which it wasn't. And I was the baby needed a diaper changed. I took her out to the van, and I was changing her diaper on the van seat, and a police car pulls in. And I'm like, what's going on here? And the police took my daughter from me. They took my house keys, and they put me in the back of the squad car, and they drove me to the edge of city limits and kicked me out. Off you go. I'm right outside the now abandoned Americana amusement park north of Cincinnati.
Did they charge you with anything?
No.
They just picked you up, drove you away, and dumped you off.
Yeah, took me outside the city limits, kicked me out of the car. Okay, just screw off. So the friends who I had arranged with to keep track of who I said call the cops if I'm not in such a place by such time, I contacted them. They were able to come and pick me up. I mean, all I had with me, I had like a little yellow gym bag that had like one change of clothes in it. That was it. And they took me back to their place. And I mean, and that was the last time I saw my daughter in person. I've seen her online a couple times since then, but that was the last. So I went from being primary caregiver looking after her.
Did they make you sign a peace bond or anything? Like something to keep you out of the house?
No, nothing. No, they just
restraining order.
They took my keys. I couldn't get in anywhere, because I had keys for the van. I had keys for the house where we were living at the time, and they took all those. Because we were living in Ohio. We moved to Ohio at that point. We moved to Texas at that point. Yeah, so I'm on the streets in Cincinnati with no money, one change of clothes. So fortunately, I had friends from Dayton who came and pick me up, and then she started the false DV claim against domestic violence claim against me, which was, I mean, it was ludicrous. And then when it went to court. And we'll go to court. I'm going to court about this, and because the reason she did it is the DV claim gave her temporary custody, so she could take my daughter and piss off with her. That's what it accomplished. Because I've rethought the whole couple day scenario. Like, what could I have done differently that would have changed it? And there's nothing. There's nothing I could have done differently, because the moment she makes the false DV claim, she gets custody, and no matter what the situation is at that moment, it then becomes she has custody and possession of my daughter, and she can go anywhere with her. So even if I had still had her with me, the cops would have come and taken her away. So that there was really nothing, because I always question myself. So it went to, and again, Pyrrhic victories I mentioned before. There's a few. So we sit down, and now to paint the picture a bit better than I have been, my ex-wife is 5'10". She was 250 at least, maybe 300. Like she was big. She was like broad-shouldered, very big. At the time, I was much heavier than I am now. At one point, because, when we were married, my depression was running rampant, and as such, my weight was spiraling out of control. But I recall incidences when I was over 400 pounds. And if she was feeling amorous, let's call it, she would come up behind me, grab me in a bear hug, pick me up, carry me into the bedroom, and throw me on the bed when I was in excess of 400 pounds. So I'm not talking about a demure, petite, fragile, delicate woman. Not that anyone is, like, I am against anyone being violent towards anyone ever at all. Period. But I mean, she definitely looks like. I mean, if I were to get in a fist fight with her, I'm not sure where the best way to place the money would be. That's all I'm saying. She worked in a factory lifting heavy things, and so she had big arms. So she shows up there, and I guess it was domestic violence day at the courthouse. I don't know. So she's there, and all of the other women sort of waiting their turn to have their cases heard are these small, fragile, bird-like women with black eyes and arms in slings and bandaged up and everything. And she's sitting there like she's the size of three of them, and there's not a mark on her, So but I'm looking, and it's a woman judge. Like, oh, terrific, I'm not going to be believed. I'm screwed here. Woman judge, all these domestic violence victims. No one's going to believe me. No one ever believes the guy, right? There's another side story I won't delve into that explains part of it. But anyway, so she gets up and she tells her story, her nightmarish tale of being terrorized and victimized by me, which, strange enough, had no resemblance whatsoever to the sworn statement she'd given the police when she filed the false domestic violence claims. Like, nothing was the same between the two stories at all different stuff. And as it had happened when my, again, this is important, again, it's sort of a bit of a backtrack, I apologize. When it had happened, the day of the kidnapping, I sent an email to a friend of my father's, ultimately, like sort of friend of the family kind of a person, but someone who'd been very close friends with my father. And I said, here's the situation. And I put in detail the chain of events. Like, this happened on this day at this time, and then this thing happened, and then that thing happened. And it sort of recounted like everything that took place between the trip from Texas back to Ohio to get our stuff and what the plan was to happen after that. And it was detailed chronologically, just sort of bullet points kind of thing. Like, here's this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Account of things. Because I remember my father telling me that if you're ever in a situation that might end up somewhere down the road having legal issue repercussions, you want to write it down and get it straight in your head as soon as possible. That's really important to do. So I had done this because I'd been talking with this friend of the family as a potential of maybe moving myself and my wife and my daughter to Canada so that then I could work and we could try to get my wife legal to work and she could look after the baby for a while. That was one potential solution that I had proposed. Although it turns out that because of her lengthy and exciting criminal history, Canada would have nothing to do with her. They wouldn't let her into the country. So that became not an option because of that. So anyway, so I'm sitting here and okay, I take the stand and she's taking this. And I'm sorry, I'm making these gestures that are off camera. I apologize. So she takes the stand, and the judge turns to her and says, "Okay, tell me what happened." And she told a story that had no bearing, like no similarity to the sworn statement. She turns to me and says, "Well, what do you have to say?" As I said, "Well, look, when this first happened, I did happen to write an email to a friend of the family that chronicles all of the events." And I printed it out and brought it with me. I said, this is very systematically done. And this was done before any of the charges against me were filed. So, and it's dated, right? Email, it's got the date of when I sent it on it. And she says, "Well, I don't really need to see that. I just need to know, is what she said true?" I said, "Well, no, not at all." She said, "Thank you. That's all I needed to hear." And then it was like the turret went and aimed at my wife, and she ripped into her for like half an hour, up one side of her, down the other. "How dare you come into my courtroom with this obviously fake claim? How dare you do this to your child?" And I'm like, whoa. Wow. It's like, and again, like, from one point of view, Pyrrhic victory. Another point of view, I haven't got to see my daughter again in person since that date, so it didn't help in that regard. But it was somewhat, because domestic violence is a serious black mark against you in society. And again, like, I've had social issues forever, and the last thing I need is to have this black mark of, wife beater hanging above my head. And so that was terrifying, right? Am I going to be marked with this, scarlet letter type accusation on me forever, if this goes badly? But yeah, she totally just reamed out my wife, it was like, a small victory, a point for the good guys kind of idea, but it was, losing a one battle in a lost war, I guess. And then and that was the last time I ever saw my at that point still wife was that day. And she was not too pleased about how things had turned out either. Wow. But part of it, well, yeah, that would be a whole other story. So yeah, and it's a bit overly tangential, but yeah, her parole officer was very sympathetic to my situation because he knew he'd dealt with my wife a couple of times, and his exact words were that he prefers dealing with murderers or rapists or bank robbers because they're better human beings. His words, and he's a parole officer. That's his job. He says, yeah. He said, people like your wife, he said, are the lowest forms of life on this planet because they will lie about anything to anybody. They have completely amoral. Just you cannot believe anything they say ever. You can never trust anything they say ever. They will do anything. They just do not care. Which is a fairly accurate way of describing a sociopath, but which, yes. So in that regard, yes, my mother definitely had sociopathic tendencies as well. So
perhaps something on the dark triad, the psychopathy,
yeah,
Machiavellianism.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to remember what my one professor used to say was like the nastiest combo. I think it's a sadistic sociopath. I think is what she used to say is like the absolute worst of the absolute worst of the absolute worst are the sadistic psychopaths. Because not only are they capable of doing anything, but their only real motivation is inflicting pain on other people.
The absolute evil.
Yeah.
The what do you call it?
Yeah, you can't negotiate with someone like that. Yeah, you can't negotiate with someone who can lie about anything at all, and like no remorse, no motivation towards decency, no investment in the social contract, nothing. There's nothing there. It's like negotiating with a shark. Yeah, you're not going to get anywhere. But it's worse because a shark's not going to lie to you and tell you, okay, yeah, I won't bite you. Don't worry. They'll just bite you. But yeah, these people who are that far and like unrepentantly, and I'm aware it's a spectrum. People have it to different degrees. Some people choose to transcend their limitations and choose to be social, even though they don't have the internal mechanisms for that to be automatically what they want to do. They still choose to do it, and so at some point, yes, some people have more of a struggle to achieve certain things, but ultimately, at some point, it becomes you can make a choice. And I mean, I've had to do that myself in regards to my depression, in regards to the PTSD, in regards to the anxiety issues, in regards to picking up the pieces and trying to move on with my life. There comes a point when you can choose to be what your history is trying to make you, or you can choose to be something else. And I chose to be something else. And one of the things I do when the suicidal ideation is getting a bit overwhelming is I try and remind myself that ending my own life would be doing too many people who absolutely do not deserve it a big favor. So that's the reason to keep going, is because it pisses off all the right people that I'm still alive. So,
or even just the fact that you could help people, right? Just by sharing your story.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've tried. I mean, my dad spent most of his, when he wasn't doing his day job, he was trying to help people. And when he passed away, there was people from all over the country who said these wonderful kind things. Because he had a history of find people who had ended up in horrible situations, who were, addicted to drugs, who were in, really bad relationships, this kind of stuff. And he would help them. He'd go out of his way and he'd help them find jobs. He'd help them get support. He'd help them get out of these bad relationships. He'd help them get out of being drug addicted. And as a result, a lot of people really loved him for what he did. And he was a very spiritual man, which I know in the here and now is not socially popular. But I mean, he was born in the 1920s in rural Wales, where there wasn't running water, where there wasn't electricity, where horses were the main mode of transportation. So he in many ways was from a different age than what we live in now. And he was a very religiously inclined person.
The Maslow hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, but because he knew he could he knew how to live off the land. And I mean, how many people today could go off in the woods and set up house and know how to do everything? And he did. He was like, yeah, he was, because he'd grown up where you're living that close to, human ancestors' way of living. He saw. He used to say that he'd seen more technological change in his lifetime than had ever happened in all of recorded history before that. And in many ways, that is absolutely true. I mean, he went from, a thatched roof where you had to grow a new roof every couple of years, riding around on horses or in carts, cooking over a fire, to a world where there's supercomputers. It's like, that's a big change. But how he used to describe it was, he says every time the devil, he said, I helped two people to kick him back. Was how he would describe what motivated him to go out of his way to help people. Is that it was payback for against the forces of evil. Help people, which it's an honorable thing. There's a lot of anti-religious sentiment that I can sort of understand, but I don't associate myself with much. But he was helping people, so yeah, I'm not gonna tell anybody who's helping people that they shouldn't be doing it, because they don't have a good motivation. You shouldn't help people because you believe in God. You should be selfish and not believe in God. It's like, no, he's like, people's lives are made better. So he had people from, and a lot of people went on, and we had number of paintings in the house that were gifts from people he had helped. I know the one guy who was in a kid who was in a bad home life. My dad got him a job. He was able to get his own place, and he saved up his money for like 6 months, and went out and bought this painting for my dad to thank him for sort of getting him out of that trap he was in, essentially. And so that was the painting we had in the living room. Is this guy had got my dad, and so there's a lot of. So I mean, I sort of understand. Like I understand my dad in a broader context than some people who only hear about him from experiences that are happening to me in my childhood. Yeah, because I sort of have run the gauntlet of most of the primary issues that you guys deal with. So yeah, but what happened?
What happened with the false allegations?
There was a group of call it what it is, juvenile delinquents, who some of whom were tangentially associated with some of the people who worked for my dad at the hospital, like they were cousins and stuff like that, and he was trying to help them. And this would have been the mid 80s, when the pedophile hysteria was running wild. And these individuals were very well. One of them would have been charged with attempted murder if they were old enough. They were too young to go to be tried for attempted murder. But yeah, they had attempted to murder one of their cousins at one point. So not the savoriest of characters, problematic, very destructive, and he was trying to help them get them smartened up, and then at one point they were over at the house because they'd wanted to talk to him, and they were trashing the place. They weren't like lighting fires and stuff, but they were like knocking things, and they were like roughhousing and making a mess. So I kicked them out. I said, "That's it. Get out of here. You guys aren't, you guys are being destructive." And so they got really mad about that. And so when they saw my dad next, they tried to get him to punish me for having kicked them out. And he would not do that because I told him what had happened. And he goes, "No, you guys were acting inappropriately, and he kicked you out. That's what he should have done." And they got really mad, and they said, we're gonna get you for this. And then these false charges of sexual assault against them by my father appeared. And like one of the kids who made these claims wasn't even living in the same town at the time. I mean, there was no occasions when my dad and these kids were ever alone together. I was always there. So I knew that these very disturbing scenarios that they were accusing him of had never happened. When it went to trial, and again, largely to protect me, his lawyer advised him. He said, "Look," and there was and as this happens, you end up with a litany of. It's not one charge, right? It's a litany of all these charges. And the lawyer had advised my dad. He said, "Look, if you can fight them, and you'll most probably, win on them." He said, "However, if they can find you guilty of just one of these, because you've chosen to fight it, they essentially lock you up and throw away the key." And at this point, my dad was in his 60s, and his health wasn't very good. So a long prison term was gonna. That's it, right? But he said, I said, but if you plead guilty to this, you won't go to jail. You'll get a suspended sentence, sort of a thing.
Unfortunately, that's how the justice system works now. Is that bargain?
Yeah. So they said,
here's what would happen to you.
Deal, cut a deal. Admit, sign off on it. You won't go to jail. Because he was like within a year or two of retiring, so he was going to just retire early, and it's over and done with. Whereas, had he gone to jail, I would have been homeless, essentially, because I couldn't go back and live with my mom, and he was paying the rent, right? Because I think I was in grade 13 between grade 12 and grade 13 back when there still was a grade 13, back when this was happening. So I didn't even have my high school diploma yet, as far as being able to get a job and support myself or what have you. So he, took the devil's gambit or whatever it is, what you want to call it, and decided it would be the lesser of two evils would be not to fight it. And they promised him he wouldn't go to jail, so I would not be left high and dry, versus fighting it, and then maybe he could go to jail for decades, right? He didn't know if they can find you guilty on one, it's longer. So that's what he chose to do on the advice of his lawyer, and then he still ended up getting 6 months, a 6-month sentence. So that's when I learned how to forage in the woods for berries, because he'd set it up so the rent would be paid, but I had to figure out how to feed myself. For the sick. Well, he got out a bit early. And I remember when he got out, the warden came to see him. And the warden said, "I've never said this to another inmate ever." He said, "But I believe you're innocent." Which was very touching. It's something, right? Pyrrhic victories. You take what you can get. But yeah, because a couple of times when he was doing the 6 months, they said, if you go for therapy and you admit that you did these things, you can get out earlier. And he said, no, I never did them. Like, he never actually said he did it. He just said, I'm willing to plead guilty in exchange for, you know, considerations. But he maintained he wouldn't do it. And like, yeah. And unfortunately, shortly before this, he had surgery for lung cancer and had part of his lung removed. And then the lung cancer came back while he was in jail and unable to get to his doctor. So when he got out, the lung cancer that had come back had spread quite significantly. So when they took out the portion of his other lung that it had spread to, there was virtually, there's very little lung material left. So he had to be on an oxygen tube. And then shortly after the operation, he got pneumonia. And when you get pneumonia and you don't have much in the way of lungs to begin with, it doesn't end well, and that's what finished him off. And then my wonderful loving mother, because when he died, he left me a fair bit of money, not lots and lots, you know, like, but some what he had. And so my mother sued me for support, based on the fact that she should have, that if the divorce had been finalized before he died, she would have gotten the money. But because now the money was in my possession, she was suing me for that money and froze all of my bank accounts. So I got to be even better at foraging in the woods for berries. But thankfully, one of his investment guys, who had been court ordered not to dispense any of the money, said, screw her, because he knew some of the details. You know, screw her, Ed, if you really need the money, come and see me. I'll give you some. You can pay me back later. Because I know this is BS. So that was my last semi-direct interaction with my mother, is when she, froze all my bank accounts because she was suing me for my dad's money after he died.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that about wraps it up.
Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of wells I can dip into for dealing with the crap that the world seems perfectly happy to dump you with if you happen to have been born with external genitals. Yeah, it's
Hopefully
sad.
that
Not that this stuff doesn't happen to anybody, but it seems to happen a lot more frequently to who do not have matching X chromosomes for whatever reason or reasons, be they sociological or biological or political or what have you. But yeah.
All right. And yeah, part of changing that is sharing stories, right?
Yeah. People need to know that. I mean, because a lot of times when I tell stories like this too, the response I either get, "Oh my gosh, that's so horrible, I don't believe it." 80% of the time, 20% of the time is, "Yes, that happened to me too," or "Yes, that happened to someone I know."
Yeah.
So I mean, it's way more common than anyone wants to deal with in polite, open society. It's one of those things that, you know, everyone knows about, but no one wants to talk about. We pretend it's not there, like the way people walk past homeless guys on the street. And they predict, I don't see them, I don't see them, I don't see them. It's the same almost mindset for this kind of stuff. People don't want to see it. It could never happen to me. I don't want to see it. I don't want to think about it. No. That's not part of my reality. I don't see that. It's what you get. And it's understandable. People don't want to think about it. Sorry?
Somebody else's problem. SCP cloaking device.
Yeah. It could never happen to me. It barely ever happens. It almost never happens. I'm sure, you know, it's exaggerated, blah blah blah, because because it's terror, and people are dealing with ideas that are terrifying. They want to put them away. Like most people don't want to talk about, you know, people don't want. I had a friend whose job was to contact people to sell them funeral packages for when they die. Now that's something that everyone's going to need, you know, but no one wanted to open the door to talk about what kind of funeral they want when they die, because that's a scary idea and they don't want to deal with it. And it's the same mental gymnastics people do. It's like, oh, well, you know, yeah, it happens, but oh, you know, some people live to be 100 years old, so I'm not going to worry about that yet. It's like,
bad example for me because I don't really care what happens.
yeah.
Throw me in the lake. I don't care.
Yeah, I had a friend who used to say, go through my pockets and look for loose change and roll me in a ditch and leave me there. Yeah, because it's, you know, you're not there anymore. It's not, you know, it's not you. It's just a piece of meat is meat and bone and gristle is all that's there once you're alive. It's like, yeah. But people don't, even that idea people don't like. Like, oh, yeah, it's sort of. I had a leg up, being that I was suicidal at 5. I had a leg up on dealing with me.
All right. Well, I've enjoyed this talk.
Oh yeah, me too. Me too. It's nice to be able to talk about it and not have people scream and run away. And it often happens when I talk about this stuff. They don't want it. They don't want to hear it, and they panic. And yeah, sometimes they get angry with me, and sometimes they hate me and never talk to me again. But you know, it's what it is. That's the world we live in, and if we don't talk about it, nothing gets fixed.
All right. Hopefully, I'll be able to put this up on the internet.
Sure.
I'll let you know though.
Yeah. Sure thing. Yeah.
And
if you want more information about anything, absolutely, I'm happy to do it. You know, field questions from sure, terrific. Yeah, if I can help, let me know. Happy to do it. Again, like people need to be aware. People need to, like, you can't, like, the A thing, right? The first step is admitting there's a problem. And that's what we got to work at. And so, yeah, more people need to go up and go, yes, this really happens. This is a real problem. That's step one. Then we can worry about, okay, what do we do to try and fix it so it stops happening? What can we do to help the people it's already happened to, so they're not living lives of anguish, daily anguish and misery, which much of my life, unfortunately, for me, has been daily anguish and misery. Because there's little to no help available for people who've been through what I've been through, and what help there is not really helpful, I've found so far. And
yeah, well, I guess I'll call you. I'll let you know how this.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'd like to see how it all turns out. Yeah, and if there's any sound issues, you want me to go over something again so it's clearer, or there's ambiguity with me, anything, let me know. I can go over it again. It's not, like I said, like, as horrible as these things are for me, that was my daily life. It's, you know, I'm sure people who work in like slaughterhouses, they get used to seeing animals being chopped up every day. Someone walking it off the street, that'd be horrifying. I can't deal with that. If you work there for 20 years, you don't even notice. I didn't know any different as a kid. So it's as horrible. I can look back and go, oh my God, that's horrible. And sometimes I'm out in public and I'll see a little kid, particularly a little kid with like reddish blonde hair who looks like around 5 years old. I'll see that kid and I'll go, when that was me, what I wanted most in the world was to kill myself. And then it hits me. And sometimes I'll be out in a restaurant or whatever, and I'll break out crying, because now I can see, you know, 5-year-old me here's this little kid. And how do I know that he's not in the same situation I was in? And not that I'm not sympathetic to people who don't look like me, but I mean, it hammers the point home when I see a little kid who looks kind of like the pictures of me at that age. It's like, wow, that was, because adults, you look, 5-year-old, it's a little kid, it's a baby, right? It's little babies shouldn't be, people that small, people that young shouldn't have to deal with that crap. And, you know, as an adult, I can be very protective, want to protect those little kids. But when I was that little kid, no one really was doing much to protect me. And so, yeah, so I would, if I can fix that, do anything to reduce the probability by 1%, I will do that, because no one should have to be that little kid who wants to kill themselves when they're 5. You know,
and that's what this is all about: preventing suicide, preventing torture, helping the kids, helping the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
there's prevention is worth the cure.
Absolutely, yeah, because it is a thing. People don't want to talk about it. Too fucking bad for them. Excuse my language. It needs to be talked about, because little kids. I mean, and there are kids that age do in fact commit suicide. The rates are lower, But yeah, it's
I'm going to stop
unconscionable, and it needs to be dealt with. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry.
I'm going to stop the broadcast now.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll still be talking. We'll see. I'll just let you know.
Okay. Yeah, I have a tendency towards being loquacious.
If there's anyone watching right now, I guess wait till next time.
Yes.
And it's time to wrap it up. Okay. Goodbye, folks.
Bye.